Welcome back to Athlete's Pursuit. I'm your host, Joe Rodanis. I want to welcome you to this episode. Today, we're going to be talking about some training styles, some of the more popular ones, strength and hypertrophy. I'm going to walk you through some examples, and we're going to get a little bit more detailed slightly with some of these different approaches that you can take in your own training. When we get into this today, I'm just going to be kind of riffing with you guys and talking about, weightlifting, which is something that fires me up every day. And I want you to understand that I'm really coming from the lens here when we talk about this stuff from the view of the general population. And I think that's a very important thing to understand, that when I think about, my entire life has been about this. When I was learning about training on my own, using it in my own way, figuring things out, getting better at it, learning more about the topics, getting certified, becoming a coach, becoming more experienced, and now having all this knowledge, this different knowledge of structures and how to implement different things with different phases and all that, it can get very complex, but the principles remain very simple. And I think that this is a very important thing to understand, that early on, and I think that there is a viewpoint in the general population that it's very enticing to look at someone like a Mr. Olympia or any professional athlete, an NFL linebacker, receiver, running back, whatever, and even a famous actor that's gotten just absolutely jacked. You think about, every time The Rock has a movie, they're like, here's his training program. And it's understandable that we would want to dissect their training program and say, what do they do? What does Christian McCaffrey do during his training to be as fast as he is and as resilient as he is? What does Chris Bumstead do in his split to develop the size that he has, the aesthetic that he has? And it's always good to look at that from the most elite in the world and understand how they structure their week, their months, their years, from everything across the board when it comes from lifting, their sets, their reps, their tracking, their recovery, their deloading, how they increase intensities and decrease intensities, the types of lifts that they do. We need to understand this stuff. That being said, the general population can make this much, much simpler than those training phases. And I think sometimes we got to get a little bit too ahead of ourselves where we're looking at these advanced techniques and trying to put them into play when we haven't even mastered the basics yet. And I include myself very much in the general population category when it comes to training and how I'm doing it. I really believe in a lot of great structure and being intelligent with my approach so that when I go into the gym, when I go into my session, it is with a purpose. I have a program. I have a plan. I know what I'm doing and it's getting me somewhere. Randomized workouts in those days where you're just going in, guessing, the longer you do this, I think the more frustrated you get with that type of thing because you're just you're not going anywhere. You're not working towards something. And then it starts to add up to where these days become frustrating because you're putting in all this effort and you're not seeing a result that you want. So I'm coming from a place today of sharing some of what I think are some of the more important principles within the categories specific today of strength and hypertrophy to help you stay on track, to pay attention to the most important things so you can develop a program or a structure for yourself that kind of fits into your life. That is really the goal. When I'm thinking of, as a coach and for myself, I'm looking at it from this lens of how can I understand the principles that the best in the world are doing and then take that overarching structure and put it into a plan that works for myself, knowing that I don't have to be as advanced or have as many changes as they may have. The more advanced, so that we can take a step back, the more advanced like a pro athlete that you've been doing this, the more complexity that needs to be intertwined into your programming. So that's not you and me. Like when you look at a Christian McCaffrey program, like you see it all online. His training is so impressive and it is great to watch because you can see at an elite level what someone like him does, where you have your strength days, you have your speed days, you have your max lift days, you have like these body primal movement days, you have these very important recovery sessions, and they're intertwined within certain weeks and certain months. There's a lot of moving pieces of high intensity days, lower intensity days, higher intensity month, lower intensity months. So there's a lot of moving pieces. And someone like him needs that level of complexity because of how adept and elite the dude is. But for someone like you and me, when we're talking about going into the gym, it does not have to be that complex. We just need to understand some very simple principles to follow. And if you want to, intertwine more complex periodization techniques or different splits and things that you could do, methods that you can implement because you're hitting plateaus or whatever, you can do that. That's totally up to you. But today we are going to talk from a foundational level, the things to pay attention to within these categories. So this is about developing a framework. And I come from this because I think it's so important to understand that you can mess up and there is room for you to play as a member of the general population, that you can follow a framework and there's a science that we need to, kind of understand, but there's also an art to this, and you have this room that you can play to make room for engagement. I think that is very, very big factor, because people quit because they're not having fun. And in the beginning, you got to have a good time with how you're training, and how you structure your week needs to meet where you are today. So let's start very first with kind of my approach to building a foundation. And then we're going to get into a little bit more about strength and hypertrophy. And we'll kind of advance this as we go. In the very beginning of your lifting, and this is for the person that is relatively new, or you've been lifting, but you're kind of getting back into a groove. I always get asked the question, what's the program that I should do to get, build the most muscle, develop the most strength? I've been off of it for a while and I'm trying to get back on. And my answer is always the same. Everybody wants me to say, here's the program that's going to solve the problems. Here's what you need to do 4 days a week. Here's what you need to do for a 6-day split. This is the route. But it's not serving that population. The truth is, you need to first and foremost just develop frequency in your routine. I cannot understand. I know how simple that is when I say this, but if you do not have consistency and frequency locked down into your structure, you will never get the results you're looking for, because none of these techniques and methods and principles apply or work if you are not consistent with your routine. So I look at it like this framework of, if you have a week and a month, I'm trying to fill in a certain number of days and time that I'm hitting no matter what. That is like route number one. And honestly, one of the hardest parts when you're coaching someone that is trying to get into this lifestyle, that is the hardest hurdle to get over and to develop, is one, getting someone to get, see how important it is to develop this routine. And then two, developing new habits of creating that frequency is incredibly difficult to do. But if you can see it as just a weekly calendar of, I have time slots of Monday, Wednesday, Friday. These are the days that I am going, and it becomes, a ritual where it could be 25 minutes to start out. Build the frequency first where you're going, and for a month, you don't miss a day. And to me, it doesn't even matter what you do within those days as much as you're going and creating the habit of working out and being there during those times. This is where I look at the difference between someone in the beginning, and we can categorize what they're doing as exercise versus someone who is trained and training. And we hear this a lot of, what's the difference between exercise and training? And you hear that people say that, like, I'm training, I'm not exercising. And put simply, you could say exercise is random, training is progressive. But another way of seeing it is, exercise to me is, it could be fun, it could be a starting point. I think it's where you're learning about what you enjoy, what you like to do, the styles that you like to work in, the type of sport you like to play. It's like an exploration period, and exercise can be great, amazing for someone that's beginning or is just looking to move. This is another very important thing to understand is you can move towards the progression of training. And that to me is more the professional. It's someone that is doing this as a lifestyle. It's locked in. So now we can get more specific into training, which is what we're about to talk about when we get into like strength, hypertrophy, different methods. Now we have a specific result that we're trying to get into. But the beginner is going to be exercising, and we're filling activity. So to me, You build the frequency, you go in and do activities that you enjoy. You can go to different classes. They don't have to make sense. They can be random. It's that movement and you finding joy in learning what you like to do is so important. It is not to be understated. I think sometimes sometimes I feel like we do understate it, but it's such an important aspect. So finding consistency in the rhythm is a huge thing. Building a base then when we're talking about specific movements now. The first part is finding what you love. I will say this forever, and I cannot understate this. There is a period of exploration that I think we should go through. I've gone through it in my own, training journey where at every stage of my life, I've been working out in a different way. And I think you got to let life guide you a little bit. This is just kind of my approach to it of why go against and resist what you don't naturally love, right? Training should be fun. So if you're into hiking, let's find ways to train so that you can get better at hiking. You like running? Well, then great. Let's figure out a routine and a way to help you with your running by lifting in ways that's going to help you with your run. It doesn't have to be overwhelming, doesn't have to be too much. We can just start where we are. Now, for the general population, when we're talking about building a strong base, I'm a big believer. I'm a big fan of starting with strength training first. And when we talk about strength training, to me, in the beginning, this is about foundational movement patterns. Just squat, hinge, push, pull. You're building strong bone density. You're building muscle. You're getting strength in connective tissues. And you're building a foundation for all the daily activities that we do all the time. And if you can master movements like squat, hinge, pushing and pulling, push-ups, squats, deadlifts, a pull-up or some kind of a pull, you're going to be set up for your lifting journey. These are like the absolute basics that you will do forever. And this is going to improve your metabolic health. You're going to learn about progressive overload. It prevents injury. It's going to make you feel better. You get an improved sense of confidence and mental toughness because you're doing these movements that you didn't think that you could do, and you're starting to master them, and they're going to carry over exactly into everyday life. This is where we all start. This is where I started, right? You just don't think about it because I'm like a kid in, junior high, and we're just going through gym class and like doing squats or push-ups, but you don't add weight just to add weight. Like you build up to this type of stuff. I always see things in the context of like evolution, like where do we start and like how did we get here to where we're adding weight? And when you really simplify this, we started with a push-up, for example, and we weren't good at them. We got like one rep. I did it for, you do it kneeling, and then you get into a standard push-up, and then you're like, I can crank out 20 when all I could do was 5 before. And then now I can add a plyo to it. So I'm getting a little bit better at that. And then you get to a point where, well, I can do 100 push-ups nonstop, and I'm not getting results from this anymore. So I need to make it more difficult. And so doesn't it make sense that we added resistance? So you added a barbell, you added weights, and now you're back to, I can only do 5 reps, but it's more weight and more resistance. You see how this carries on? This is why it's like from the grassroots level, this is what we're doing. So remember that the basics, mastery of the basics is in itself mastery. Training can be very simple, and in my eyes, it should be very simple. I hammer the basics because the basics work. All this complexity is noise to me sometimes. Unless you know how to apply it, I think it's bells and whistles most of the time. There's a lot of proven methods. There's a lot of great things that do work, but it doesn't always apply to us all the time. Let's keep things very simple in the beginning. So foundational mastery is everything. I was listening to Lupe Fiasco actually gave this lecture. He's a teacher now. I think he's still doing it at MIT, teaching rap theory. And as I was listening to this lecture, he spoke about this idea, and it's not a direct quote, but basically it was like this idea that artists need to have foundational knowledge of their art before they can innovate. So meaning if you don't have this foundational knowledge of your art, like if you're a musician, and you want to be in classical music, if you don't understand the foundation and the history and the rules within classical music, well, then how could you make classical music? And how can you innovate within that space? Because then it would just be too random and all over the place. So, but at the same time, you don't want to just do what is already written in the history and just being strict to the book, because then you're not innovating. So it's this balance between the two, and this is the science and the art. So we need to understand some of the science and the principles, and then we can start to mold it into our lives. And when we talk about lifting, the basics and the foundation are those movement patterns: squat, hinge, push, pull. We do not have to overcomplicate it. I do a squat every single week, but I do several variations of different squats throughout the year. I do a Romanian deadlift and deadlifts multiple times a week, but I do different variations. I do all kinds of different pushing motions, but different variations. This is where you see those as your main categories, and then tons of different variations that you can interject into your programming to let them evolve at the right time. So there's enough consistency and evolution as you move along. So let's dive into quickly some of these 2 categories. And I'm just going, again, high level. These can get complex. I'm kind of explaining it from how I see it, because I think simple is better. And that's really what creates action, in my opinion. So strength training, put very simply, it's about building strength. And strength training is measured in your body's ability to produce force. Force equals mass times acceleration. It's a very simple principle, and that's what it comes down to. Force equals mass times acceleration. So strength training, your ability to produce force comes from the amount of weight that you can push and how fast, how quickly you can push it. How fast can you accelerate the weight? So when we're talking about a back squat, you get to 100 pounds. If it's very slow moving, right, you're not able to produce a lot of force at that weight. You can start to build your tolerance for that type of weight. And if you train focusing on concentric, moving quickly on the stand up, you're going to improve your body's ability to produce force, right? So over time, we start to increase, progressive overload. We get to 225 pounds. And now think about how quickly you can start to move that weight. That develops your body's ability to create force. So that's what strength training is really at its finest. I view it as a way of just developing almost like speed, power output. It's more of a performance aspect to me, strength training. You focus on compound movements. Strength training in design of programs is going to be heavy on your compound movements all the time. You're already familiar with these. This is your bench press. This is your deadlift. This is your squat. This is your overhead press or a pull, right? These are the movements. So think barbell, and they're called compound movements, put simply because it involves multiple parts of your body. And this is a very important thing to understand when it comes to strength, is that you're not isolating. You're working as an entire unit. So when I'm doing a deadlift, I might be focused on the lower half, where I'm focused on the posterior chain, right? My hamstrings, my glutes. But you're also involving your quads. You're also involving your grip for holding the bar. You're also engaging your lats to keep the bar close to the body. You're engaging your lower back to protect the spine, your core to assist with the lift. So there's a lot of other aspects that are going on within a deadlift. And the same thing with a back squat. It's every part of your leg, and it's different parts of the muscles throughout the movement, and you still have your core engaged, you still have your spine engaged, and your back engaged. And depending on if it's a back or a front squat, you're going to get your entire body involved. Bench press actually uses the lats, it uses the triceps, obviously hits the chest, but it also hits the quads, if you can believe it. If you're lifting in a proper form, you're actually driving through the legs as well. So it's a full body type thing, and we're focused on performance. It's a little bit less isolation work, which gets into hypertrophy, and we'll talk about that. But exercise selection is going to be very important when it comes to strength training. Think about it more as lifting kind of a max weight. It's a lot of barbell movement. And then when you think about smaller movements that you do in strength training, so I'll give you an example. We call these accessory lifts. If I'm hitting my bench press and you're doing bench press for an extended period of time, let's say we've been working on it for like 3 months, 4 months, and you've been improving, we're all going to hit a point where it's like, I've reached the limit. I can't push more. This is where we start to interject like different stimulus, different ways of supporting the bench. So you have to think about, one, excuse me, how I'm hitting the bench press. Can I manipulate sets and reps? The second is thinking about accessory movements. So I mentioned those other supporting areas within the bench press, your triceps, your lats. So can you do smaller movements like tricep extensions and skull crushers to strengthen your triceps And that itself will help strengthen your bench if you lift within a certain way. And same with like lat pull downs, pullovers, those can help you strengthen your bench press the same way a push-up can. So those are called accessory lifts. So in the eyes, the lens of strength training, you think about the smaller movements that you might do in quote unquote isolation, where I'm targeting the triceps, targeting the lats, targeting the hamstrings to make your main lift, your compound lift, stronger. That's really what you're doing. You're building a resilience within your body to improve that main lift. And in strength training, we measure how strong we are through those main core lifts: squat, bench, deadlift, row. That's what we're doing. So I hope that kind of makes sense. This is the thing about strength training that I love, is that there's a lot of benefits to it, in the sense of you will be building muscle. You're going to improve speed. I think there's a vitality to strength training. You just obviously feel very strong. There's a heavy impact on your nervous system. You can get one of the things you have to pay attention to is actually fatigue with strength training, really with every training, but there's a heavy cost on the nervous system within strength training. So fatigue management is incredibly important. And you'll notice within splits, to give you some examples with strength training, general splits are they look like this. You got like an upper lower split, could be like 4 days a week, 2 upper, 2 lower days. You could have a full body split 3 days a week. For the very advanced person, you could have a 6-day a week structure of like a push pull leg sequence that you rotate. So like a push, bench press, overhead press, a pull day, deadlift rows, a leg day, squats, leg presses, and you could like recycle those through. But 6 days on strength training is pretty heavy, and usually for the advanced, like strength training, I think should be somewhere around 3 to 4 days, because again, it's kind of heavy impact for the central nervous system. So I'm in a strength training phase right now. It's where I am, I'm building up volume again within strength training. I wasn't doing it for a long time, and just where I was feeling slow going into strength training at first. The weight feels heavy. You're not used to moving weights that fast when you're kind of getting acclimated to this. So be patient. This is why in training, it's always important to meet yourself where you are, not where you want to be. There is a build-up process that needs to happen, and you rushing to think about the weights that you used to lift and how you used to move is only going to get you hurt and disappointed. So meet yourself always where you are. And this is why it is so important to understand these principles and give yourself a plan, because you can work the plan, trust it, and through the weeks and the months, you will get to where either you used to be or you want to be. But there is no rushing this. Rushing is just, it's a bad road. It's not smart. But I have always found that understanding these principles and understanding the structure, it gives me this sense of, just this sense of confidence, to where if I ever lost, if I stepped away from strength training again and I changed my style up completely, well, I know how to get back, right? Just like if you stopped running, but you were running marathons forever, but you just changed focus. You're like, I'm going to go heavy into lifting for the next couple of years. Well, if you wanted to get back into running again, you know the road back. You know how long it takes. You know the structure. It won't take as long as before because you've been there before. Your body's adapted to it. So having this plan has always kind of helped me develop kind of that confidence. But strength training, I love it. There's obviously bleed over benefit of the main benefit of strength is that force production, lifting max weight, building bone density, reducing risk of injury, building explosive power, functional movement quality is going to go through the roof. Hypertrophy now, on the other hand, to quickly go into this, is more about developing muscle mass and muscle size, really done through isolation. So hypertrophy, you will build strength as you're lifting for hypertrophy, but the main benefit is muscle mass. So now we're literally building the size of the muscle itself. So when we talk about these two categories, it's an important thing to understand that both will do these things. Like you will get bleed over benefits when you're training hypertrophy. You will get stronger and you will build some explosive power with strength that bleeds into strength training. And with strength training, you will build some muscle mass and you will build muscle size. But one or the other does it better. It just is a straighter line. It's a more efficient route. So that's how I always view these things. Sometimes when you're getting into this and you understand these two categories, you can blend these two. You can have some elements of strength training mixed with some elements of hypertrophy. And you can develop a great routine that way. You really can. This is where you can start to mold and understand different methods that you can do that for. And if that works for you, what feels good for you. It's just when the reason why people talk about methods and different techniques that they use, it's because it's just about getting a very specific result the fastest way. It's like taking the straight route versus, taking all these different stops and kind of round and about and taking your time with it. Because if you really know that you want to develop size and muscle mass in a specific area, like I want to develop the chest, I want to develop my rear delt, I want to create the V taper and work on my lats, I want to develop, more aesthetic legs, quads, posterior chain, whatever. That's where hypertrophy is the most efficient and effective way to get it done. You can just get there faster. We know the tech, we know what to do with it. We know how to get there. And it's the same with strength. If I had a goal, if I need to develop explosive power, well, then I'm going to go into strength training methods to do that, to get me there as fast as I can. I might be able to develop strength and power through hypertrophy, but why not take the quickest route? So going back to hypertrophy, the goal is muscle mass and muscle size. So this is very popular within the bodybuilding world. This is hypertrophy, right? You've seen splits like this is where common splits come from. A 5-day split of day one, chest, back, shoulders, legs, arms. Like each muscle group has its own dedicated day. You can do push-pull days too, where you have a pull day, a leg day. There's upper lower splits that you can alternate between the two. But the point is within those days, they're more focused on specific body part. So it's a greater amount. You can train more frequently in context of the number of days because it's not as high of a cost on the central nervous system when compared to strength training. And you can give your body enough time to recover from the muscle group that you just worked. So I'm not going to work chest again for a while until, like in that example that I just gave, I'm not going to hit chest again until day one again. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days to recover before I get back into chest. Same with back, same with shoulders, etc. So you can hammer volume within those days. And then general rule of principle though is like 72 hours to recover between muscle groups as a general rule of thumb. But you can really up your frequency with hypertrophy and you hit those muscle groups in isolation. So one of the drivers of hypertrophy when we talk about this is mechanical tension. You'll hear that word thrown around a lot, and progressive overload is talked about a lot. Some of the biggest things when I think about hypertrophy when it comes to mechanical tension, what that means, so you really understand, is simple. It's control of the weight through the full range of motion, and it's about, think about a 2-second or 3-second eccentric. So that means you carry the weight down slowly. You go like 1, 2, 3. You stretch the muscle through the range of motion, and then you fire through the concentric as fast as you can. But the thing about that is the weight should be heavy enough to where whatever your given sets are, you should be fairly close to failure at the end of your set. Picking the appropriate weight is going to be very important because you want to lift heavy enough weight that you're controlling through the eccentric and getting that stretch, and also heavy enough to when you're firing up through the concentric, it moves relatively slower because it's the appropriate weight. And if I have a set of 8, then by the time I get to 8, I should feel like I'm either at my limit or I have 1 or 2 repetitions left. That's incredibly important in hypertrophy. And then through the weeks, as you track your weight, you can go through progressive overload where you just increase your weight slightly as the weeks go on within a program. And that's kind of the general idea, to keep it really simple. But hypertrophy, I think of as a loaded stretch technique. You're really stretching the muscle. So form is so important because you're getting back into isolation. So you're not wanting other parts of the body to recruit to help you get a lift up. So if I'm doing curls, I want to be strict on my curls. I don't want to be swinging and developing momentum, or I don't want to be, getting help or leaning back because now I'm recruiting other areas of the body to lift. And that's not what we want to do. And I'll give you another example. When it comes to isolation, hypertrophy does not usually use compound movements. It can. It's not to say that you won't. It's just that it's more efficient to do things like machine work. So in strength training, you see a lot of barbell, a lot of squat rack, a lot of fast movements, a lot of full body movements. In hypertrophy, you see more machine work through isolation. So leg presses, hack squats. Instead of deadlifts, you see more Romanian deadlifts because it's isolating the hamstrings a little bit more. You see machine bench presses instead of barbell bench presses, dumbbells, so you can get a greater stretch, a lot of chest flies, isolation. So I hope that helps with that. When we get into, and I guess the next kind of logical question is like, how often do you switch between these two? I get asked that a lot too, like, well, when should I strength train? When should I do hypertrophy? And it's really just it depends. It's totally personal to you. I will share, because it's always based on your goals. That's really what this is. Personally, this is just my approach. This is just totally my opinion. This isn't based on a textbook. This is just like what I like to do. Because again, I think that training is about developing a style and a rhythm and a cadence that just hits with your life and what you enjoy and your goals. Like, it's this beautiful balance between all these. So through the years, I've kind of gotten into this rhythm, and I'm still somewhat developing it, but I've gotten into a really nice groove where I like hitting strength and hypertrophy at different points throughout the year. And I'll tell you how I get there, because I went through a period where I was all random, and then I got to a point where I was like, all right, let's develop structure, and that was in strength training. And I had been doing that for several years, like let's say 4 years of just strength and conditioning sessions, much more athletic type of workouts, full body type workouts, like all the time, every single week, month, throughout the year. And then that started to burn me out. I wasn't doing a great job of getting enough rest in between those. So I pivoted to hypertrophy, and I did that for about like 2 years, where I was just straight on hypertrophy, and it felt so good on my body because of the change of stimulus that I was not giving it before. Because I was in a strength training space, and then changing up my environment, I was like, let's just go into hypertrophy. It felt therapeutic because it's not as high impact on the body. So I was feeling like myself, like just building myself back up. And I stayed in that groove for a while. I stayed in that for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, put on some size, really enjoyed lifting that way. Then the downside of that is that a little bit of power and speed started to just kind of decline. So I started to feel that. I started to get to a point where the other side of the spectrum, I was feeling a little sluggish in some of my lifts. And I was like, I'm going to change things back up into strength training. And I've been doing that again for the last month, and it's felt amazing. And my point in telling you that story is just sometimes the change in stimulus between these two can be exactly what the body needs to feel great again. Because if you do, the thing about the human body, you do one thing for too long, I don't care, even if you're mixing up your sets, your reps, your movements, your structure, the body is intelligent. It starts to figure out the pattern at some point, and you got to change the stimulus up. This is where it gets confusing. Like, people hear that and say, well, I got to keep my body guessing. I got to keep changing up stimulus. I got to do from week 1 to week 2, I got to change this. From month 1 and month 2, I got to make all these drastic changes. And this goes back to the point that I was telling you before. As general population, you do not need to make drastic changes frequently. You do not. So my programming example for myself, I will follow for a month for 4 weeks. I'll either, if I'm hitting strength training, I'll focus on that for 4 weeks, and I will lay out my 4 days. I do a 4-day split. And I will have my movements, and I will have my reps, and I'll have my sets, and they will be consistent from week 1 to week 2. No changes except for intensity and weight, but the movements are the same. Sets and reps are the same. And then I might alter subtly the sets and reps within week 3 and 4, but the movements are going to be 90% the same. And then in month 2, there might be slight manipulation, but again, the structure is going to be 80 to 90% very similar to 2. I might just change the reps to bring it from high volume to lower. So you have subtle variation. I think people make drastic changes too often, and you're never really able to acclimate. So keeping that in mind, consistent is good, simple is better. And when you feel like you need a little bit of a change because your body may be plateauing, just make simple adjustments. So I'm kind of in this groove, in this wheelhouse now of I'll be doing strength training, I think, for the next like 3 months. So we're in October. I'll probably carry this into like January, and I would feel somewhere around like January to March, April, I'll probably get back into a hypertrophy phase and mix in towards the tail end some strength training, and then get into like a little bit of a stagger where I'm like maybe 2 months of strength, 1 of hypertrophy, and then flip it like 2 hypertrophy, 1 strength, and then like blending. But I'll always be in these wheelhouses between the two. But all right, enough about me. Let's get into my last thing I wanted to talk about today when it comes to some high level structure, which is just accumulation and intensification, understanding what these things mean. In the tonal community, I've been talking a lot about this, and the community really like grabbed this. This comes from the concept of understanding just basic periodization. So a lot of us don't understand what that even means. When we think about strength training for the general population or just lifting weights, most of us just think that we go into, think about someone that's not in the industry, someone that's not really knows a lot about weightlifting. They're just trying to be in decent shape. They're just trying to take care of their health. That type of person really walks into the gym and just goes, I went to the gym 4 days this week. I lifted legs a couple times this week. I went to the gym 12 days this month. So that was a really good month for me, right? They're not thinking about how I did this month. So in 3 months, I should change it up. Or if I could, this month should connect to month 2, should connect to month 3, should connect to month 4. You're not thinking about the bigger picture. And that's what periodization is. Periodization is basically just understanding that what I'm doing on this Monday and this week is going to connect to week 2, to week 3, to week 4. And I'm going to have a plan going into month 2, and I'm going to have a plan going into month 3. And what I did in month 1 is helping me in month 2 and is helping me in month 3. There's a connection between all of them. So you understand within those systems in the structure that I'm going to elevate intensity here. I'm going to lower intensity here. I'm going to make room for recovery here. It's just looking at your entire calendar and all the levers that you have at your disposal and knowing when to place them at the appropriate times. And when we talk about the general population, you don't have time to think about all that stuff. You just don't. So you hire a coach, you work with someone to help you with programming, where this is going to be kind of taken care of for you. You can work through this. You got something like Tonal and it's taken care of for you. You got your programs and it's knowing what you're doing. So it's recommending when to take deloads, when to recover, what program to do next based on your goal. But if you're doing a lot of this yourself and you're even thinking like, what's the next program that I should be doing? A simple structure that I like to recommend is understanding accumulation phases and intensification phases. Accumulation phases, to break it down very high level, is focusing on building a foundation of overall volume in your training. So you do higher reps, you do more reps, more sets, maybe slightly more exercises. It could be lighter to medium style weight because you're more concerned about the repetition. So it could be like 4 sets of 12. It could be 3 sets of 20. Generally, it's reps higher than 10. Anywhere from like 10 to 20, sometimes 30 if you go into there. But think about like in the wheelhouse of 10 to 20. And the goal with that phase is to improve your work capacity, your muscular endurance, and building a solid base for more intense training coming up. So in the strength training phase, you could do compound movements that are hitting, like I was just doing this past month of hitting moves that are like 20 repetitions and deadlifts for 20 reps at a lighter weight, but it's building such a tolerance for the work and for the endurance that when I get into my next set, which is intensification, I'm going to be more prepared to lift this heavier weight and recover faster. So intensification is a phase where you're lifting heavier weights with fewer reps. I'm focused on strength and power. You're pushing your muscle a little bit harder with overall less volume. And you can think of it like, you can kind of think of it almost like running a sprint versus a marathon, right? It's going to be quicker bursts. You're going to recover a little bit faster. So you feel a little bit stronger. But strength power for your heavier lifts is kind of the name of the game. So alternating between these two phases is really where it's at. This is where, again, there's an art to this. Like there's not really a super strict way to do this, but I like to recommend either a 1-to-1 ratio where I do 1 month accumulation, 1 month intensification, or I like a 1-2 where it's like 1 accumulation phase and then 2 intensification phases. The only thing that I really shy people away from is doing more than 2 accumulation phases in a row. 2 is already a lot. So that's the only thing that I really kind of, put out there as a disclaimer of paying attention to. The reason for that is that accumulation phases at such a high volume takes a tremendous amount of effort. I mean, it's a lot of work. Your body's going to be feeling fatigued. And so at some point, your body just goes to a place where it's like you're not increasing your training performance. You're just increasing global fatigue within the body. And now results are going to start to diminish. When you were seeing improvements, now you're just getting tired. And that's where that's why changing stimulus is important. There is a limit that we reach and we have to change. So to me, this is an easy structure, I think, a simple structure to understand and to implement for the general population to keep a rhythm in your training and to try to not plateau. That's really what it is. I've been using this similar structure for a long time, for years. And I mean, it works. We talk about it all the time. It's just a nice place. And again, it's simple. So, cause plateaus or feeling like you're not making progress, like that happens in your training. I've been there. And so these are kind of the levers that I start to pull, is thinking, do I need to move to a strength training phase, or should I move straight into hypertrophy? Or if I'm within the category, do I need to, am I getting slow a little bit? If I'm having a hard time recovering in between these sets, well, then it might make sense to do an accumulation phase so that I can get my endurance back up. I can get my work capacity back up. But then the opposite could be true, where I'm like, I've been doing high volume and a high workload for a pretty long period of time. I feel like my lifts are suffering because I'm not able to move as much weight right now. I'm just getting a little bit tired. Well, all right, it might be time to slow down and lessen the reps and focus more on heavy weight and building back up and reducing the amount of work you're doing, and make it more focused and heavier. So you can alternate between those two. So that's generally what I wanted to dive into today. We'll talk a little bit more. I want to dive into, I think on the next one, more of my approach to my personal style of training and kind of the evolution of where I've gotten to, because at the end of the day, I'm learning as I've been going too, because the problem that I have been trying to solve ever since, you got to go back to, I was in sales at one point and I was just working a corporate job and just trying to be in shape and understanding what that was and how to have that fit into my life. And it became this obsession with how can I keep energy levels high. I enjoy this so much that I want to keep progressing, but it was hard to get an answer at that time in my life, to get an answer of, well, what's the structure that I could use to follow? Things felt very complicated. I felt like I was getting inconsistent answers from different, coaches, online magazines, etc. And so I was always looking for an answer to figure out, how can I create a rhythm for myself? And if I'm doing this work, if I'm in the gym, if I'm doing my training and I'm dedicating like an hour each day, or when I'm in there, I want it to add up to something. And when it wasn't, I got a lot. Of course you get frustrated. I got very frustrated with that. I was like, why am I wasting my time doing this then? Like if I'm in here, I want to get something from it. I'm putting in all this work. I'm working hard, but hard work is just part of the strategy. It's not the entire picture. You got to have, you got to have a program. You got to have a plan. So hopefully this helps, keep things a little bit in perspective. There's always more to discuss. Again, this was a high level overview. This stuff, you can get so into the weeds, man. There's a lot of science behind this stuff. There's a lot to talk about. We'll dive in more, but yeah, hopefully this helps. So hope you enjoyed the episode. Go ahead and share this. Get the word out, man. I'm just trying to help you guys get strong as possible. And we'll see you guys next time. Later.